So next we have earth-shattering questions about spirituality and sex. How can sexuality become a path to deeper spiritual realization? Is it by completely surrendering oneself to God, letting go of the sexual desire? Are there some meditative practices that can help to go from pleasure to divine bliss? I think one must be aware of the hedonistic trap in all sensual enjoyment. Sex can become a distraction for meditative practice and practice in the presence of God. Not an easy topic to talk about. We would just have to admit that talking about spiritual experiences in sex and probably spiritual experiences in general is very difficult, isn't it? Because first of all, I mean, they are mystical experiences, so we have our experiences, but it's very difficult to describe in words. The whole quest is, the truth and the reality. So as soon as we start talking about it, putting some, labels and constructs on it, we are immediately getting the sense that we are walking further away from reality, right? But also the fact that it's very individual. What is spiritual to one person to another, the path that they relate to, what that means to them. For me, I struggle with this question. Can sex become a path to, spiritual realization or to enlightenment or whatever? Which is, it's a very common idea. A lot of people are saying this. And I try to be honest that I struggle with it because it's almost by posing the question, how sex can lead you to a spiritual realization. We have already defined what spirituality is, where it should lead, and what is the goal of it. And I'm given an answer from only this system of beliefs that only certain number of people converge on, right? My passion has always been for everybody to experience the beauty of sex and the depth of sex as that really wonderful, beautiful, I'm intentionally not using the word spiritual experience, but that's probably what I mean by it, in an accessible way that is relatable to them. I would like to share this kind of sex life with anybody regardless of their system of beliefs. I respect their system of beliefs, the spiritual vision of life that they have, but I want to contribute to it with a sex practice that supports it, that, is aligned with them, regardless of what their beliefs are. And that's been my personal work, Even though somebody else would tell you immediately, yes, absolutely. If you see the consciousness in this way, if you see the divine this way, through the, Kashmiri Shaivism or whatever, you can definitely achieve spiritual realization. But, within the system of beliefs that you have built for yourself, which is Kashmiri Shaivism, not relevant to somebody else who is not converted into this, or at least an affiliate convert, if you see what I mean. So I'm reluctant to give answers that would make me define what spirituality is. I prefer to see it as, can you have an experience in sex that feels spiritual to you? Feels like it is aligned with what you see as spiritual. I don't like seeing it as using sex as some kind of a practice or a tool to achieve some kind of a spiritual goal. I believe that if there is a goal that you are looking for in it, such as some kind of a product later on that comes of it, I believe, my personal opinion, that that goal is only attainable if you don't do it for that goal. If you have sex with a full respect and connection with it and the experience of it for the experience itself, and by all means you can connect with it in a way that is meaningful spiritually for you, but it is just for this experience. The intensity of the connection with this experience right now, it's not for any other purpose. Like, I really believe in that, because I think that, if you have another purpose, then it will happen through this. It will happen through the genuine connection with the experience. But if you have another purpose and you're only having sex to achieve that purpose, then perhaps you're not really connecting with the experience. You're not like fully immersing yourself or merging with it. Does that make sense? Yeah, you are trying to use it as some kind of a tool. Obviously, there's always a danger of a bit of a spiritual bypass that happens a lot in the conversation about sacred sexuality, that it's only okay to have sex if it does bring you to, a spiritual enlightenment later, and not for the sex itself, because we're just covering our discomfort and our shame with it. My personal way of seeing sex is that this experience in itself is life itself. This in itself is already everything there, whatever you want to call God or consciousness, the flow of life or the fabric of life or love. I mean, it's all there already. It's not supposed to be for something else. I think it's important that we are really honoring it for what it is, completely devoted to it in a way, as something that we really hugely respect, this flow, this presence, this life that is happening right now. Very difficult to use words. So I think a more relevant question for people is, can sex feel like a spiritual experience, right? Not is it a process to lead by itself as a tool to some kind of spiritual enlightenment later. I'm aware that there are traditions that say that's exactly what it's for and this is how you do it. I'm aware of that. I prefer to choose another perspective that I feel for myself is a bit flexible. So not to give you a prescriptive thing, this is how you need to make sex spiritual. But what often happens, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is people have a spiritual practice in their life and they have a lifestyle that is spiritual. But then sex is kind of like it's falling behind. It's still on like some kind of old chassis. It's still about some kind of like hedonism and pleasure and, coming, gotta lust after my wife. And, obviously, as you're spiritually growing, you understand that they're just not valuable states of mind for you while you're doing your spiritual practice. You have a relationship where you have a sex life and suddenly you have to go into this a completely different level of state of mind, right? Where it's about greed and lust and hedonism and it's kind of not aligned with what you're doing in your life. So I think like a more flexible and probably more fitting for all approach with sex and spirituality is to see it more like, well, how can I bring it up to how I live my life spiritually? How can there be a practice that matches? Not like, some kind of magical rocket that will, do everything spiritual for me, take me to enlightenment. But, how can I have sex that matches my way of living my daily life spiritually? What is that about for you? It's all very intimate and personal and unique for people, how they experience spiritual experiences. So if for you it is a state of feeling just, the fabric of life, merging with that consciousness in that moment, kind of spreading out into it, if that is how you experience a spiritual experience, then you can do that in sex, of course. That is actually quite easy. Like you can do it in 5 minutes if you want to with the practice of sexual cuddle. If you do that in your meditations and whatever, then you can connect through the body and you can be there without all your goals, really connecting with the flow of that life that you feel through each other. And sex can certainly create those times when you really find yourself falling into just a certain state of that merging and that openness and that thing that we can't describe, fabric of consciousness in this moment. Yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but you can definitely fall into those states, and I think pretty easily if you already have that practice in your day-to-day life. Yeah, maybe spirituality for you is an experience of love. You can have pure love flowing through sex, and it's really beautiful when you are sharing it. It can also take you to somewhere in your state of mind consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Find yourself on that wavelength. Yeah. What if we just focus not on the ritual, but just on 100% being in the love of it in the moment of sex? Yeah. And there are different ways that people play with it, for example. If you're a Christian and the depth of your spirituality is the love of God, God's love, right? And if you have a wife with who you are doing God's love in your relationship, living together, yeah, then through sex you can see it as an experience of God's love, but directly through each other. A lot of the references in the sexual practices from kind of more prescriptive traditions, they often focus on retention and channeling sexual energy, right? So that seems to be central. I think that sometimes that's all there is. The truth is, like I've seen many instances of a lot of talk about sex being a spiritual rocket to the enlightenment, but when it comes to sex, like their definition of sex being this amazing spiritual force is retention and channeling. And to me that's a little bit simplified. To me, like there's got to be more to it than that, but you will often see those instances. However, that's a good thing to take on board. Like if you're interested in feeding yourself spiritually through sex, that's not a bad thing to assist, I believe. Channeling your sexual energy can be whatever you want it to be. Like I prefer just generally to feel it flowing through yourself and just let it go where it will go and see where that will take you. I don't teach, this kind of more religious practices like channeling into your crown. But if that's what you want to do, if that's what you believe, then that's, fairly easily practiced and developed. And if you want it to be a crown, it can be a crown. If you want it to be heart, it can be a heart. If you want it to be a whole body, it can be a whole body. Retention is something that people always go on about, in my opinion, excessively. It's almost like, if you retain sexual energy, you're going to become spiritually enlightened. But, there is more to it than that, I suppose. Retention is good, but I think it's also the real experience of connection and aliveness you're connecting with in this moment through every vibration that you have flowing through your bodies right now in this experience in sex, which can be from nothing, which can be from stillness, where you just like really fall into that aliveness that is there. You're just feeling yourself in a different dimension just from being there, being with that energy. I think it can happen like at any point in sex, throughout sex, through everything you're doing in sex, So retention to me it's not enough, basically, to just do retention. Although, yeah, you'll certainly feel when they talk about transmutation of sexual energy, again, like a lot of the time it is mentioned only in the context of retention. So it just basically says, don't come and you will transmute. Then sometimes it's extended a little bit to don't come and also breathe it up into your chakra or whatever. Yeah, and then you will transmute. Transmuting means that, you are converting sexual energy into what is called spiritual energy. I would go further and I would say, well, you can transmute through everything you're doing in sex. You don't need to channel it into any particular place. You can just absorb it. You can just be really there, feeling that feeling, absorb it into your system, connect with, the vibration that is flowing into you. And that will create a transmutation. So you can be more like a sponge rather than a rod where everything is flowing just in one direction, And there are some really beautiful states that you can find yourself in from something really gentle. People will tell you it's all about full body orgasms and lifting it up to your chakra and having orgasmic energy flowing through your chakra. I believe the most interesting places for spiritual experiences in sex, they're not this intense dopamine flooding, what's called orgasmic energy. That can be nice too. But I think it's more of the really kind of relaxed places. And there's some really interesting things that can be happening there. I think my point is that, there are all interesting things to explore. Yeah. Like I said, the practices are multi-layered. Somebody can do, and they will just feel, okay, this is really lovely for us to be together in intimacy, loving each other's bodies, filling up with nice feelings, positive energy, some pleasure, loving each other's bodies. And this is what we need for our relationship. And then that practice totally works for that and gives them a good sex life. Somebody else will do that practice and they want to go a bit further into it, connect with the things that you are talking about. But you can do that through the same practice. It really doesn't need to be more complicated. Like your meditation probably is not a very complicated technique that you are using in a very simple way, day in, day out, but it's because you are deepening more into it with a very simple technique. That's why you are getting what you're getting from it, right? I'm trying to teach things in a simple way in holistic sex without all the jargon or very complicated. They look very simple because that's how I wanted it. Just as a little story, the course was written in 2015, the whole course. I published it only a couple of years ago. All that time went on to simplifying it. Generally speaking, I think with all sexual techniques, all practices, all techniques, they're just windows. They're not the end result, What we can teach as teachers is these are kind of the basic elements that you can do, the practices that you can do. And if you do them well, they open the window for you to experience your own thing, not the thing that I'm teaching. I'm teaching you sort of a number of windows. You go through those windows into your own experience and you're equipped more to then explore with these simple practices a more unique and diverse for yourself experience. So ultimately, the best experiences that anybody is going to have from any of my techniques, I can't teach them in the course, because they are going to be something on that level of you being really kind of sensitive and creative and really connected that you have entered into through these techniques. But, that precise experience, we can't teach it. So it'll be special for you on that day, and then there'll be another one on another day.